to come back into the real world, as it were, in the final paragraph. They, contrary to the question posed by Wilson, knowledge management is not a fad, but indeed a discipline. So the writer is now drawing the whole thing into the field, as it were, and making a comment about the significance of the entire field of knowledge management. But indeed a discipline. So you can see the language there a little bit stronger, trying to leave on a high note that is continuously being embraced by visionary leaders, and then going back to it's significant because leaders face this serious challenge. If knowledge management is correctly addressed and implemented, this will certainly enable. So going right, generalizing right to the field and indicating the significance of the research to the field. And in quite a strong way, indeed, certainly. So this writer has really tried to leave an impression on the reader of the contribution that has been made there, even if we're a little bit critical about the way that they've pulled it together. It just, I'm not a statistician, but it just looks so sort of, there's such a contrast to me between the model at the end and all this careful, statistical analysis and all the data and validity issues being so central to the, but you see again, this is probably a disciplinary focus. And then this kind of rather interesting model at the end is quite, is dealt with in a very by the way. I mean, he does say it's ideal, and he does talk about the organization growing continuously, and he talks about core knowledge. So he is addressing the picture, just as he's addressed the tables. That's quite important. In your chapter, you don't want to put in a whole lot of tables and stuff and not discuss them. Remember, the tables are the way you organize the data. In a way, perhaps that's the information, but you're not creating knowledge out of it unless you actually comment. And that's something that students very often do. They almost sort of like forget to have the discussion. So just, be aware of that. And they have quite carefully dealt with the various tables that they've used and explained. Now that's another interesting thing. If you look at the bottom of page 5, where they begin talking about the tables. Table 1 indicates that. Research has shown that there are a number of different patterns for referring to tables and figures. It could be table 1 indicates that, or as has been indicated in table 1, or in brackets, see table 1. But the most commonly used one, and across all disciplines, everybody makes use of a variety of these ways of referring to them. So it's not too much the same all the time. But the most frequent one used across all disciplines is this, table 2 indicates, or table 2 shows, or whatever. So where you start with the focus on the table and then describe it. But you can see that this writer has done things differently. If you look under reliability of research instrument, he's also got a summary of the variables in terms of reliability is presented in table 4, okay? And then he's got as listed in table 4, and he comments on it. So no table appears without some comment in the discussion. Though interestingly, he doesn't actually say that the model is in figure 2. I was just quickly looking to see that. He doesn't actually refer to, which is a problem. He should have done, where he talks about the use of the knowledge tree model, he should have said see figure 2. Yeah. Sorry.
And just a thought that we had, what we didn't comment on, was that, and maybe that the way that it's described, table 2 indicates, is almost suggesting that the table is so organized that everything will leap out at you. We felt that it actually wasn't that well indicated. Are they there?
Yeah.
But that in perhaps making some of the claims, it would have been useful to actually point out or highlight or asterisk or something, the ones that are really important.
Yeah. So there wasn't sufficient.
So it was there, but in a broad sort of way.
Yeah,
Whereas perhaps they could have been more specific, and that it would have linked the claims and the actual tables.
Yes.
That's what we.
Yes. Again, look, I'm sort of trying to understand really how it's working. Space is very limited here.
Yes.
So it may be that you get this sort of sense of truncation and not too much repetition. Making those links explicit is really important in your dissertation and your thesis. Very often one feels when one's writing, oh my word, I'm saying it again. But you need to, not to be repetitive. There's a difference between making sure that you make the links and between simply being repetitive. If you're repeating something, you do it in a different way, you perhaps do it in a summarized form, or if you are repeating something exactly, then you need to say, as listed in chapter 1 or whatever. Because you don't want an examiner thinking, and I've often done this reading a dissertation, I've read that before. And then you start whizzing through to find out where you've read it before. It's very disruptive to the reader to feel there's a repetition here. But if you are upfront and say, as stated in, or, and make those cross references, that's actually very important as a way of keeping your reader on board with you and making sure that they know where you're going all the time, but at the same time not allowing them to think that you have been careless and you're just saying the same thing. Yes. Sue.
So I've got a question about the last paragraph.
Yeah.
The one that says contrary to the question posed by Wilson. So sorry, I cheated. I downloaded the article, and this is the first time that Wilson is mentioned.
Yeah.
So I still thought that wasn't allowed. That you shouldn't be contrasting and comparing in your sort of analysis discussion and kind of thing, stuff that you haven't said, before in rational maybe.
But this isn't really, I hear exactly what you're saying, and I did say don't introduce anything new in the conclusion. But one of the things that you're doing in your conclusion is trying to round off, and here he's definitely taking, what he's doing is locating this in the field, as it were. So this is obviously a criticism of the field. Knowledge management is a fad. I don't think it's an argument that's relevant to answering the questions. It's a much broader issue than that. So I wouldn't say that he's bringing in new information. I remember it's always difficult to find a sort of final thing. And I remember in my doctorate, my supervisor saying to me, you have to end this off on a high note. And I'm thinking, oh, what high note, And I managed to find a really nice sort of quotation that didn't repeat what I said, but kind of emphasize the significance of the kind of thing that I was doing. And I brought in that quotation at the end to sort of claim that what I'd done was in line with this guru's call to do something in the field. Now, I don't think that was new information. It was a way to contextualize my contribution. And I think that's what they're doing here too. Yeah. I like the way you always look up the references. No, it's great. And that's a really good question. But I don't think that this is kind of like part of an argument. It's more like a positioning device. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I said it earlier, but they should really be appendices, or, you know, they're very much part of the process of, you know, getting your valid variables, exposing your valid variables or your relevant variables. So, number one, if they do want them in the body, they should probably be under research methodology. I think you already said that. Number two, it's only really table 4 that probably belongs under results, because the rest is just part of the process of getting to table 4, and it makes for quite, you know, just waste space. And as Brian said, you can't even read the tables properly because what they're trying to say, you know. There's nothing highlighted or whatever. So I would, if it was my article, I'm not very experienced at all, but I'd have thrown them into as appendices, maybe.
Okay, now just remember that as a dissertation writer, you have an option of appendices, a very useful thing, an appendix, very useful.
Why don't you do it for journal article?
With a journal article, you're committed to the article. And I do think that these are findings. If you think about what the object is, the object was to look at variables that had come out of the literature and to see whether they were actually valid. So that's what they've done. I don't understand the process either, but they've obviously processed these variables in various ways, and then things that didn't sort of like link up together, then they tossed them out and boiled down. Are there any statisticians here who don't listen?
I was thinking that table 4 is really the only part of the results. The rest was part of the process to get to those results, and as such, probably didn't belong in the results. I don't know.
Well, the table presents the results from the process. The process was doing the operation, and the tables are the results of that, I would think.
Yeah.
But I mean, I absolutely take the point that there's not a lot of explanation as to help you understand the significance of what is happening there. Absolutely, that is true. Which again, you know, we must reiterate this, that it's that significance, that argument for significance, that we want to be careful. We look at something like this and it's easy to critique somebody else's writing. It's so difficult, as we know, to sort of generate it ourselves. But we can see what happens to us as readers when the writer hasn't actually helped us sufficiently to understand the significance, or hasn't presented things in such a way and discussed them so that we understand the significance. So we then determine that we don't do that in our own writing.
Caroline, if I can possibly just,
Yeah, sure.
perhaps I should just withdraw a little bit of the criticism. If you look at those tables, and maybe it's the print, but I mean, they have emboldened the ones that actually stand out. The higher loaded ones are there. So but a little bit of textual reference to that would have helped, I think. So you can see the higher ones are the ones that are the loaded
I see, yes,
factors,
they
etc.
are bolded. Yes,
So those are
no,
the
that is
significant
true.
ones.
That is true. But there again, if you're going to do something like that, present something in the tables, then you need to tell your reader
What that
the
means.
significant ones have been bolded.
Absolutely.
You can't
Just
let your
leave it.
poor reader sort of bumble around and eventually discover, that's what the writer meant.
Yeah.
That's exactly what examiners will jump on. So I think, you know, it's quite an instructive exercise to look at how somebody deals with all of this, and they got themselves published. So that was that was success, I suppose. Okay, well, all the best with your final chapters, and yeah, I don't know whether you want to talk about sort of what happens next in terms of your
Folks, just a couple of words really of thanks and what's coming up in the near future. Firstly to Caroline once again, now we've got the language of swoops and sweeps, beautiful stuff. I've got this image of a champagne glass, very lovely image of what the thesis should look like. Mine looks like a beer bottle by comparison to the beauty and elegance of a champagne bottle. And then you've got these quilts that so there's perhaps a whole discourse on quilting that could come into it. But thank you so much for once again taking us through all of this in such an elegant way that it just gives us a structure that can help in terms of the writing, which is a real challenge of this particular. You've got an exception or something.
Oh dear.
So Caroline, thank you once again for all that you do.